Nicholas Rossi's Salt Lake County trial for the big R word was this last week, Monday through Wednesday, August 11th through 13th. And I was there every day for at least half the time because life is lifing. I couldn't get there the entire time, but I have notes, filled in blanks where I needed them, and I was there for the verdict. It was exciting. You can go back and look for my really quick reaction video. Though, spoiler alert, guilty, freaking hallelujah. I wanted to cover what the trial was about, how it went down, and all of that good stuff. So let's do it. If you're unfamiliar with this case, as a lot of people are, I have a playlist, and I recommend going to see that for the whole breakdown. But really massive nutshell here, Nicholas Rossi has a string of treating women very, very poorly, shall we say, and using religion as a manipulative tactic, his charm, his coercive control. There's a string of victims from Rhode Island to Utah to the United Kingdom. It was thanks to a victim in Ohio who reported what he did to her, and then there was then his DNA in the database. And then when Utah passed a bill in the legislature several years ago to fund testing all of the R-word kits that had been gathering dust, there was a match. They were able to link him directly, and then another person came forward. The first one was from Orem, which is about 40 miles south of Salt Lake. And then there was a woman in the Salt Lake area who came forward and said, hey, he did that to me too. When he realized that the police were on his trail, he faked his death and then took off to the United Kingdom, where he changed his name, got married for, I think, the third or fourth time, was living under this assumed name until he was finally tracked down and extradited to Utah about a year ago. I believe it was August of 2024. And then he finally stood trial for the Salt Lake case. And then he will stand trial for the Orem case in the Utah County Courthouse in Provo in September. That is a huge nutshell. Crazy, crazy stuff. This guy is he is a piece of work. This is what he looked like as a younger man. He changed along the way. So I had a couple of fun experiences while I was at the courthouse. However, I wanted to bring those up really quickly. First off, and just one more. So my novel, this is my suspense novel. The whole book is essentially set in a fictional version of the Wasatch Front, the Rocky Mountains in the area where I live. So I needed a journalist at one point. Not a huge character. Is there someone local I could use for inspiration? And I remember thinking, Ben Winslow seems like a good guy. I follow him on social media. So I named my journalist Ben Winsley. There's a little part there you can see on page 209. And then also I made up the channel, so it's K-Timp News, because I live in the shadow of Timpanogos Mountain. So that was supposed to be a nod to that as well. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that on the first day of trial, I'm sitting there on this bench, and it was the bench right in front of the official media one. And I was hearing some voices during some breaks, and I thought, that kind of sounds like Ben Winslow. I wonder if it's him. And then I took a peek at one point, and it was. So at the end of the day, when we went into the hall, I was like, so funny story. When my book, I'm a novelist. I named a character after you, and I mentioned it on Twitter when it happened, and I tagged you, and he goes, "Oh, I remember you tagging me." So I got a picture with him. So that was kind of fun. So this is Ben Winslow, who was kind enough to let me snap a picture of him after I named a character after him in my book. Didn't give him a beard. I totally should have, but didn't think of it. I also was able to meet a lovely woman named Jane and a journalist named Mark that were fascinating. They've been following this case. They came from Scotland, where he was extradited from, and I learned all kinds of cool things, chatting with Mark in particular. So that was fascinating. Here is what he looked like going to his various hearings in Scotland when they were trying to get him extradited, which he dragged on for freaking forever. A lot of my notes in this cute little notebook that my daughter got me from. This is Italian leather. She had a trip to Italy. It was a work trip. So days 1 and 3, I had this with me. On the second day, I had left it home. I thought for sure I had it with me, and then I get to the parking garage and it wasn't there. And I'm like, I can't drive home now. I would miss a good chunk of the day. And I was looking, what other paper do I have in the car? And I realized I have my grandma bag, my Mimi bag, and I had a little scribble pad in there for my grandkids. And so this is like little scribble paper that I took notes on day 2. I'm going to be referring to my notes from days 1, 2, and 3 from my nice little notebook, and then my scribble papers. Didn't type them up this time around. I'm just trying to get this out because it's been almost a week, and since we had the verdict. This is a picture of him doing an interview with his wife, Miranda. In my opinion, Miranda is complicit in some of what he did. She definitely has been defending him, but he is a manipulative, violent human being. And I suspect she has been coerced into, whether it's a Stockholm syndrome situation, I don't know. She's not as bad as him because she hasn't R-worded a whole bunch of people. Let's put it that way. Fun fact with this picture, the defense kept objecting many times to this picture being allowed into evidence. You probably can't guess why. They said it's obviously a mugshot. No, it's not. It is a mugshot, one of his many. There's no like the little height thingy. There's no like prisoner number thing or which county it's whatever. No, it is the name of the jail. So the judge said this could be a driver's license. It could be, it could be a bunch of different things. So the judge let it in, but there was over the objections of the defense many times over. A couple things that were interesting. There were 3 facts that were stipulated to that were really important here. Because number one, that Nicholas Rossi is the same person as Nicholas Alverdian. Now, Alverdian was his birth name, and then he took his stepfather's last name when that was Rossi. And that's before he turned into AKA Arthur Knight, which is, he called himself Arthur Knight Brown, as well as just Arthur Knight. Weird. Stipulated that that's the same person. He's admitting that now. When he was first extradited back to Utah, his first appearances in court were like, oh, I am Arthur Knight, and he was fake English accent, all of that. It was ridiculous to give a fake birth date. So they stipulated that, yes, this is the person we say it is. Both sides agreed to that. They agreed that he was in Utah at the time of then the alleged crime. Now he's been convicted. Hallelujah. The third stipulation was that he and the victim had a relationship during the period in question, from November to December of 2000. They said her name in court. I will not be. I will be referring to her by the initials that she had at the time, which is what most media are using, MB. And I have massive respect for this woman. I heard her testimony and she is fantastic and so brave. And I'm so impressed with her. When he first came into the courtroom, he's smaller than I expected. Based on like hearing some of the recordings I have of him yelling at people and knowing the awful things he's done, I didn't expect someone who's about my height. I thought he would be much taller than that, but a little bit unkempt, not as unkempt as when he first arrived. This is what he looked like when he first was extradited. That's his Utah County Sheriff appearance. At the Salt Lake hearing that was, I am Arthur Knight in a big oxygen mask here. The first hearing he had was with a female judge, and then after that it was moved over to Judge Lawrence, who has seen him for the rest of this time and oversaw this case and this trial, because Nicholas kept pleading illness. Oh, I'm too weak to come to Salt Lake. They have found nothing wrong with the man. He claims that he like COVID, he has long COVID, whatever, and he doesn't. But the judge was like, they will get you here. Just so you know, we're not doing a virtual meeting anymore. You'll be at the next one. And his suit was not well fitting. I thought that someone like him would care about how a suit would fit. He also did not speak hardly at all. He was very much flat-faced, very flat affect the entire time. There were a couple of times where I noticed him smiling, but that was only during breaks, like at the very end of the day when his attorneys would say something to him. For the most part, it was absolute flat affect, no reaction to pretty much anything. And he had just a nasal cannula, so the little hose of oxygen, not the whole mask. The jury began with 10 individuals. I did not see jury selection the week before, and then 2 of those ended up being alternates, 4 women and 6 men. 2 of the women appeared to be 60s-ish. 2 women looked to be maybe in their 20s. Of the men, 5 appeared to be white. 1 looked possibly Latino or ethnically something. But one of the women looked Polynesian to me. So we had some variety in a very white area of the world. The men were a bit more split as far as age goes. 2 of the men looked like they'd be 60 or 70 years old. 2 of the men looked about middle age, and then 2 looked to be about in their 20s, including the gentleman who looked to be potentially Latino. And that guy actually even had some tattoos. So I thought we have a variety of people here. Only 1 person of the men were wearing a shirt and tie. That was one of the older gentlemen. And based on my MODAR, meaning my little Mormon radar, guessing who might be LDS or not, Salt Lake County itself is maybe 40 to 50% Latter-day Saint, which is a much lower percentage than the rest of the state. I was guessing a 5 or 6 based on appearances might be LDS, which would track for about roughly half of the jury. The judge swore the men apologized for things running late. It was actually Nicholas's. He didn't show up for quite a while, and I'm guessing he was giving the court people trouble. So that's cute. They made sure he was uncuffed before the jury came in, however. Opening statements. This is where things started to get interesting. There were two county prosecutors, Heiner and Simmons. So Heiner did most of the opening statement. He said, Nicholas Rossi moved away, changed his name, and moved on. I thought that was just a powerful way of beginning, but she never forgot. We learned that MB, the victim in this case, had been in a hit and run scooter accident in, I want to say, so was it September or October? And she'd had a traumatic brain injury. So she was actually in the ICU for like a week. As we learned more about it, I kept thinking traumatic brain injuries make executive function decisions a little harder. It makes impulsivity more likely. I think this may have made her more of a mark for Nicholas. Somehow he was really good at finding women who were vulnerable in for whatever reason, in whatever situation. And she was so eager to get back to life and to dating again. She met him online on a Craigslist ad. That was the thing in 2008. This is before Facebook was anything but a college thing. MySpace still existed. Their first date was on her birthday. He had a pattern of meeting women and making the relationship move at hyperspeed, pressuring them, using his charm and all these things. So within a couple of weeks, things are getting hot and heavy. Weirdly, she says that they hung out at the Gateway Mall a lot, but he lived in Orem, and the Gateway is like Salt Lake. That would be kind of a drive for just a regular date, but apparently he liked Apple computer stuff, and there was an Apple store there, and he liked to go check that out. There's Apple stores closer, but whatever. But they would go to the mall, and on this particular Black Friday in November, he goes, hey, let's go look at rings. We should get engaged. And she's like, okay, yeah, whatever. But they go in there and she found a ring she liked. And he's like, let's just do it. Let's just do it. So he kind of pressured her into, let's just like, spur of the moment, let's just get engaged. And she's okay, sure, why not? We both have the same desire to have a long-term relationship. We both want the same things. He had joined the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints and used that as we want to get married in the temple, right? All of those things that you think you want. I think he's in the category of Ted Bundy, who also was baptized into the church as a way to manipulate, in my opinion. We also learned that I'm going to probably be jumping around because this part was not in the opening statements, but it's occurring to me now. So I'm going to say it now. So according to MB, when she was on the stand, she said that anytime they went out to eat or did anything, she was the one paying for it, which is red flag, including the rings, unfortunately, that it was on her credit. It was her credit application. And he was like a co-signer or whatever, but it was based on her credit because his credit was sucked. She helped pay for a tire on his car. She helped pay for some rent so he wouldn't get evicted from his apartment. He was evicted anyway, and that wiped out her entire savings. On top of that, when they went out on dates and she paid for it, he always ordered alcohol. You can't get married in the temple if you're not obeying the dietary code. That's a pretty basic rule. You know? And she admitted that she wasn't like attending church that regularly, and he was kind of pushing her to come back to church more often so they could get married in the temple. And yet she said he never mentioned going to church himself, and he's clearly drinking alcohol. And then later on, she actually saw a bunch of cigarettes next to his bed and flipped out, which is also against the code. So there's no way this dude's getting married in the temple. Loser. Once they got engaged, he became incredibly, for the sake of the platform, got to use little other words or whatever, so abusive is what I'll call it. Criticized her clothes, insisted that he drive her car all the time. He was just controlling and mean and verbally abusive a lot. So finally, at one point when they were on another date at the mall, he said something really awful, and for her that was just the last straw. She just doesn't remember what it was exactly, but she got mad. She pulled off her ring and threw it in her purse and then stomped off to the parking garage. She gets in the car and locks the door. He is just right behind her, of course, and he spends the next hour banging on the car and screaming at her. Finally calms down, and then she's like, oh, she felt bad about potentially just leaving him there because it was December by this point, middle of winter, and it's quite, it would be a long way to try to get home. He had moved to a house that was in the Salt Lake area. So it was like a 15-minute drive. So it would have been quite a hike to make him walk home. So she's like, okay, I will drive you back to your place. Well, I'll do that because I'm going to be a nice person. On the way back, he's yelling and screaming at her, waving his hands in her face. And when they get to the driveway, he's still screaming and yelling at her. She turns the car off because he's there for just screaming at her for so long. It would have burned up all her gas. It gets really cold in the car. She said, I don't remember much of what he said. She's kind of dissociated and just stared at this big tree. And she remembers the tree, what it looked like, because he's just screaming and screaming. And he insisted that if they were to break up, he's going to call the police and say that she assaulted him. He pretends to call the cops and pretends he's on the phone with them and that they're on the way. Eventually, he admits that he wasn't. And finally he calms down. and says, okay, let's go in the house. Let's go in the house and talk about it there. At this point, he is so aggressive. I'm sure she's like, well, I'll try to end things on a peaceful note and I'll drive away. So she goes in the house. He's like, let's go talk in my bedroom. They go in there, and that's when it all happens. Of course, they had to go into detail at the trial, but we're not doing that here. Afterwards, she changed her phone number, ended up having to do that twice. She never saw him again. Like most women who've been dealt with scary men, he tried to placate. And so she was trying to answer him less and less often, kind of like backing slowly away. Eventually, she put a filter on her email so his emails would just go to junk. I think in 2009, she said he couldn't block emails yet, or maybe she didn't know how. I'm not sure. But so she didn't know when he stopped emailing her because she wasn't seeing them anymore. She did try to take him to small claims court so he would pay his part of the rings. Because, of course, everything was on her dime. She didn't ask for the eviction rent. She didn't ask for the tire money back, the dinner money back, nothing. She just wanted his part of the loan that they'd taken out for the rings. And then he threatened her, so she dropped the case. She tells her parents, though, immediately after this happened, she tells her parents, and they do nothing. She was like, that's why I didn't go to the police. My parents did nothing, so why would the police? The prosecutor said that we would hear from one of his old roommates named Eric. We hear from KP, which is the Utah County victim, I guess at this point, alleged victim, but she did testify in this trial leading up to her own case. The reason being is that the parallels are so similar. Their cases are so similar, it's frightening. It's interesting to me that they were allowed to bring her in and all of her details, but not so many of his other things in the past. The jury was not allowed to know that he went to Scotland to evade police, that he faked his own death. He was convicted in Ohio for another essay, or in Rhode Island, there were other victims. They weren't allowed to know any of that. I mean, even the fact that he attacked hospital staff in Scotland because he wanted to stay in the hospital and be able to hide. This is during the pandemic, and he had COVID. And they said, no, you're fine. You can go home. And he attacked the hospital staff. He later, claiming he's Arthur Knight, he said that the hospital staff had tattooed him while he was unconscious so that his tattoos had matched Nicholas Rossi.
Loser.
I don't think he explained how his fingerprints matched or anything, but okay. The jury couldn't hear any of that. So those of us who followed his case, it was so maddening, but at least KP was able to testify. So there's that. This is the prosecution's opening statement. Still, we said that we would hear from Detective Coates. He was on the case full time. After a while, he did a whole bunch of investigation. We'll get into his testimony in just a minute. He helped find him. The defense opening statement. Heard from a young defense attorney. I appreciate her energy. She was very passionate. I think she practiced this so many times. She had this analogy that I think was not good. I love going to thrift stores. It was one time I got this puzzle and it was missing pieces and I couldn't put it together, and she compared that to this case, and how if there are missing pieces of the puzzle, then you don't know what the picture is and therefore you can't convict. And I wanted to go, bull. If you have a 500-piece puzzle and you're missing 3 pieces, I can tell it's still a dog or a car or whatever, even if a couple of pieces are missing. Like, that was a stupid analogy, in my opinion. This particular attorney did not get up and do anything else. She was at the table the entire time, but it was the more senior of the defense lawyers who was doing all the other examinations. There's a lot of victim blaming, unfortunately. Oh, she just changed her number, like, for no reason whatsoever, it sounds like. And I'm like, okay, anyone with half a brain cell would know that you don't just randomly change your number. That's a pain in the neck. Okay, even in 2008, that would have been a pain in the neck. And they're like, oh, well, why didn't she call police before? She only called the police when she saw like an article, a headline about the Utah County case. And then so she's just an angry ex. I'm still mad at my old ex-boyfriend from 13 years ago. No, as if she doesn't have so much to lose, as if this whole process wasn't excruciating to do and have her life just opened up and have to relive things. She brings up KP, the other victim. She didn't press charges at first either. Why not? The stupid things. The prosecution, after the opening statements, when the jury was not in the room, they had an objection about the whole puzzle piece concept, especially because they said any missing pieces we have are because the defense has fought, so we cannot bring certain things into evidence. So if there's missing pieces, it's their fault. So they were concerned about that analogy at all, because we have so many of these missing pieces, but we're not allowed to bring them in. I made the note to myself, Benza Winslow is sitting directly behind me. I need to get a picture. The first witness was MV herself. She described herself as married with dogs, happily married with dogs, which I thought was lovely. She talked about her education that she has. She's always been a dancer and she has been a dance teacher as well as she's worked in risk management and finance technology. She had a sinus infection, so she had a very kind of a hoarse voice at the time, very soft voice, but she was there every day, even though she's probably absolutely miserable. Time of this, all of these events, she was living with her parents. She has a bachelor's and a master's degree now. She talks about the scooter hit and run and her recovery from that when she went on to Craigslist and was trying to find someone to meet. His ad apparently said, scarf wearing bibliophile seeking counterpart. I think it's clever enough, but it's also manipulative. So it's like, oh, I'm smart and intellectual and da, da, da. First date, they actually went to his apartment, which and nowadays we wouldn't. I don't think anyone would do that. She identified where his apartment was in Orem. Throughout, she talks about how he had 3 or 4 roommates. She kind of just met some in passing once or twice. She didn't really know them that well. And as it went along, we heard from other witnesses. Their statements corroborated everything she said. Eric testifies and was like, I think I maybe have met her once. I didn't really know her, which is exactly what she said about him. She talks about his tattoos. He had on both arms. It looks like he's gotten some removed, at least on his forearms. But one of his tattoos, weirdly, I have an image of it. Oh, this is him crying during one of his interviews. Okay, this is one of his tattoos. It's the crest from Brown University, which is weird because he never went there, but apparently he hoped to go there someday. Weird that you get a tattoo of a school you'd never been to. Okay, but he said he wanted to go to Brown or Harvard. So then why not get a Harvard tattoo? The guy's a weirdo. Well, apparently while he was in Scotland, he always called himself an academic. Sometimes he called himself a professor. He was neither. At least he did say he hadn't gone there, which might have been one of the few true statements he ever made in all of this. During some of the breaks, the sheriff's deputy, there's one in particular who was so nice and friendly to him. This was on Monday. It was bizarre to me. Not just polite and helpful, but he was friendly and cheerful. And I was like, I kind of overdoing it, I think. So he worked at Chili's in Orem. Apparently he got fired for raising his arms or during an argument. He raised his hands. That's why he was fired. Raising your hand is a nice euphemism for something else, but okay. And she said he was constantly borrowing money, including that rent money, to avoid being evicted. And she said it was always my money. She said that he never seemed to be looking for work. And then when they went to get the rings, and on the credit application, he said that Chili's was his current employer, which was a lie. He had been let go. Although his roommate later testified that yes, he had worked at Chili's. I'll often bring salsa and chips home. A previous employer he listed as the Navy, the U.S. Navy, which was a lie because he wasn't able to join the Navy and finish basic training or whatever. He lied about that too. So, yikes. Somewhere in the middle of this relationship, he moved from Orem to Blair Street in Salt Lake City. They don't have like a rental contract to prove when he moved in. We know we can place him at least in January. MB was able to identify the house. She said once they got engaged, things went downhill very quickly, but she was trying to make things work. She had been taught, unfortunately, this is a cultural thing, and I'm hoping that generationally we're getting better at this, but she had been taught that you don't stand up to men or criticize men or whatever, and so she was just trying to quietly make things work, which is just so incredibly sad to me. And then she went on about the whole getting married in the temple thing, which made no sense, especially because they slept together twice before the crime here. That's also a no-no if you're going to get married in the temple. He really pushed her into a very quick relationship very, very quickly. It really bothers me, though, that he was ordering alcohol while telling her she needs to go back to church. Just pick a lane. If you're not going to go to church, fine. Just embrace that. Just whatever. And then she goes into the whole breakup when they're at the mall, the ring in the purse, the raging in the car, pretending to call the police. Meanwhile, she's staring at this big tree. Once they went into the house, she says this relationship was not working, wishing to end it. And that's when he pushed her onto the bed and did all the things. She said, he seemed angry in his eyes. She was scared. And I'm skipping the details. She was scared. She didn't know what to do. So she after it was over, she said goodbye and just left. Never saw him again. Changed her number 2 different times. One time she called him thinking that she had managed to block her phone number, but he somehow got it anyway and then filed the small claims suit, all of that stuff, and then slowly ended up trying to pull away, change her number again a few months later. She sold her ring at a loss and then still had to pay the balance of the loan when he would not. So at this point, looking at the jury, they were frustratingly poker-faced. About a third of them were like actively taking notes, but they all seemed to be very attentive. Although I will say, I remember looking at one of the 40-ish-year-old men. He might be the hardest one to convince He had a little bit of a he was kind of bald, had a bit of a goatee, and he had a harder look on his face, and I could see him being strong in one of two different directions. Either, "Yeah, well, what was she wearing?" type thing, blaming the victim, like, "Well, yeah, well, prove it to me." Whether he might not believe it unless there's, like, an actual recording of the event level for proof. Or, if he's on the other side, it would be, "You did what to someone's daughter? Someone did that to my kid." I could see him being really like, maybe he had a temper, but I didn't know which direction it would go. I later was talking to someone, one of the journalists, when we were waiting during the deliberations, and he said the same thing. I said, "There's just one juror I'm worried about." He goes, "Goatee guy?" I'm like, "Yes." He goes, "Yeah, I think, I wonder if he's going to end up giving us a hung jury." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, me too." So it wasn't just me. MB talks about when she told her parents and how they did nothing about it. Her parents, they disagree. Apparently, they testified the next day. They recount the situation differently. Understandably, I tend to believe her, not just because she's, the victim here, but also because you remember things more strongly when the emotion is heightened in you. If you think of your earliest memories in life, chances are it was connected to a strong emotion, whether it was so happy because of a birthday present, or you were so scared or so angry or so afraid or whatever. Chances are your first memory is a strong emotion because the memory is connected to those things. So if this conversation didn't strike a really deep emotional chord, like with her dad, he's not going to remember it as vividly as she will. Period. She remembers her dad saying something to the effect of, "You probably liked it and you deserved it." Her mom says, "Oh, what he meant about was you deserved it was in relation to that was you were stupid to get the rings and put your name on the credit application. It's your fault, so you deserved it in that sense." That's still a callous thing to say to your kid, but it's not as bad as what she heard. But that's what the mom says. "Oh, I think that's what he meant." My opinion is both could be true. He may have said both. It sounds like her dad's kind of a jerk. Opinions, opinions. He may have said both. I suspect he probably did. Those two statements would cut a daughter's heart in half, and she would not forget those words. They'd be seared into her brain. But to have him say, "I didn't say that," it was a blip on his brain. It wasn't that deep emotional cut. So I believe her. And so she didn't give more details to her parents because they wouldn't bother to do anything about it anyway. Fast forward, January of 2022, she's scrolling on Facebook or somewhere like that, and she sees an article about the Utah County case. And that's when she's like, "Oh my gosh, this is the guy that did this to me. Same dude." She texts a friend, and that friend says, "Call the DA's office." So she did, and they began working with Detective Coates. And Detective Coates drove her around to actually find the actual house. She identified it. When he gets on the stand later, he basically says she corroborated things he already knew. He'd been investigating Nicholas Rossi for about a year and a half. He had dug up all of the stuff. He had actually found her name in his investigation. And everything she said and brought to him was stuff that he's like, "Yeah, that matches what I've already dug up." She actually dug up, went through the jeweler and said, "Hey, can you find the credit application from 13 years ago?" And she contacted, I think it was T-Mobile or her phone company, and was like, "Can I have some of the records from this time period?" And it approved when she changed her phone number, and it all matched up with what he had already uncovered himself. Again, corroboration all along the way. I noticed that NB glanced at him a couple times. It was with strength and almost like disdain. "Yes, go you." I will say the judge, Lawrence, reminded me a little bit of Richard Gilmore, a little bit like a young Richard Gilmore. I don't know, with a beard. He seemed like a good dude. And when it came to her Craigslist ad, she went into the Wayback Machine and did a screen capture of her finding the ad that he used, which I thought was kind of brilliant on her part. MB said she does not know KP, the other victim, personally, has never spoken to her, just only knows that she has a case in Utah County involving him as well, which is why the similarities in their cases are so striking and so important. She gathered so many documents on her own that must have taken so much work. The defense would try to say, "Oh, she's just the angry ex." And I thought, okay, the documentation proved that she had a relationship with him. And I was wondering, okay, so is this enough to show the jury that she's not just a bitter ex? That she did all this legwork. Why else would she do that? She had nothing to gain and so much to lose. We had the parents testifying, and I didn't see them in court later. That made me kind of sad. Dr. Roach, he's a counselor. He's a PhD, teaches, he's a professor, talks about treating and diagnosing PTSDs and being a victim advocate. The defense was going on off about how being a victim advocate and how you treat them. And he's like, okay, being a clinician, giving someone therapy is a very different thing from being a victim's advocate. Those are very different jobs. The defense lawyer was going off of things like, okay, well, the entire point of therapy is to make a relationship with your client, right? And I love this guy because he would take time before he answered even very simple yes and no questions. But that particular question he had to push back on, and he did a great job of that because the entire point of therapy is to make a relationship with your client. No, the point is to help your client improve their life and their outlook and to heal. It's important to have a trusting relationship with your therapist. The relationship is not the point. In fact, if you have too much of a relationship, that's a problem. Talked about what traumatic events are and how PTSD comes along. The classic things are things that you can interpret as life-threatening, and yet other things can develop them too. Really stressful different events in life. And SA is one in that list. And then the defense is like, oh, people can react to traumatic events in any possible way, and listing like being extra social or totally withdrawing, overeating, or not eating at all. And I'm like, what's your point? Like, yeah, people can respond differently. And they said, yeah, when KP testified, she had more of a flat affect than when MB testified because she was crying and was more emotional. That's a good example. People respond differently. That does not mean that they're not telling the truth. Lots of sidebars and white noise in the room. Okay, that was essentially the end of day one. Now we're going to go to my little scribble pad. So I missed some of the morning here. Tamara Vasquez, she was one of the initial detectives, and basically she was able to verify that this recording that they had on his first hearing is a legitimate recording. And this is the recording where he first shows up in Utah and says, "Oh, I am Arthur Knight." At least the jury got to hear that. They didn't get to hear all the other junk that happened in Scotland and other lies, but at least they got to hear that. And maybe wonder, what else is going on there and what was that about? Detective Coates then on the stand. He has 30 years in various parts of law enforcement. At one point, he was on the FBI Child Exploitation Task Force, computer crimes. At one point, I think still is, his job was on this investigative thing where he is statewide. He can help with investigations, agencies that need more resources for particular things. And so he started working on this case, and eventually he was working on it full time. We had more objections about his photograph, but they were all admitted. So deal. When MB reached out to him with her allegations, at that point he'd been with the case for a year and a half. Her story fit the timeline that he already knew. It filled in a whole bunch of blanks. He'd seen her name in his investigation. He'd seen the civil suit for the rings, but he didn't know the story behind it, credit application, all the different things. Verifying the last 4 digits of his social security number, his dates of employment, all the documentation she had was just verifying stuff that he had already uncovered himself. Again, corroboration as opposed to Nicholas Rossi, who lies every chance he gets. Apparently, Eric, the roommate, filed a theft report. Nicholas had stolen a computer and I believe a phone from him. So that's classy. Apple products, both. Shocker. MB thought that the house was in South Salt Lake, which is a different city from Salt Lake proper. And the defense decided to jump on that as an inconsistency. Okay, just because she thought it was one thing. They also jumped down her throat over the idea that initially when she talked to Detective Coates, she said, I think it was in January when this happened. And then when she looked at her document, she goes, oh, no, it was clearly in December because I changed my number right after. And I changed my number on this date, so I had to have been here. And they're like, she changed her story. Coates said, no, she clarified on her own. She came to me and said, oh, clarification, I got this piece wrong. Everything else, her whole actual story never changed. It was like the actual date. Because how many of us remember exact dates, guys? Like, I'm giving you a break. She described the interior of the house very specifically. There were pictures that they showed of the house and how when you walk in, there's the door and then the living room's to your left and then his bedroom was immediately to the right. The defense later decided to have a field day with that. Like, oh, his room was like on the left or the right, and she happened to have a 50-50 chance and just picked the right one. And I'm like, how many houses have a bedroom on the right when you first walk in the door? Like, that's a weird layout. They also were going off about how, oh, she said that she thought there might have been brick, on the inside or the outside of the house. And you can see the house has no brick, and it was siding. She was like zoning off. It was probably dark out by that point because it's December and winter time, and she was staring at a tree. She doesn't remember for sure if there was a brick. She probably doesn't remember if there was paint or wallpaper either. Who gives a crap? Because everything else does line up. Oh, that was so frustrating. The defense was jumping on Detective Coates because he'd never gone into the house. He found these pictures off of real estate websites of the house. But match her description. January 2023, there's an interview with Rossi where he pretended not to know how to pronounce Rossi. He's like, is it Rosie? Anyway, just ridiculous. Lots of eye rolling on my part. When he finally admitted he was not Arthur Knight, there was a hearing where he asked to be called Aliverdian, Nicholas Aliverdian, but still not Rossi, which is legally still his name. So the defense throughout the entire trial called him Aliverdian. The prosecution always called him Ross, which I appreciate. You could tell that the defense was going to try to attack the timeline, and then she spent a long time, the defense did, going about with Detective Coates about the Wayback Machine. So did she show you how that works in person? And he was like, it was years ago. I don't recall. If I had to guess, I would say she was in the room, but I'm not sure. And then she's like, aha, here's a transcript that proves it was a phone call. And I was like, he just said he's not sure. He'd have to guess. He's not, that's not a gotcha. That's not a gotcha moment, lady. At one point she was like, sure, look at this transcript. And she hands him all these papers and he's flipping through it. And then he realizes that it's front and back and he has to go back and go through the whole thing. Where does it say the Wayback Machine? And he's like, I'm not seeing it offhand. And the prosecution finally goes, we can tell you where it says that it's on this page, on this line. And it doesn't say which, it's not this big aha moment that she thinks it is, but it's clarifying it was a phone call. And that he was saying, well, do you have any emails that you have from that time period? She maybe mentioned the Wayback Machine, or maybe he did. I'm forgetting now, but it really was like, it was like a non-issue. It was not the big aha that she was making it out to be. At one point, she even was like, so where did you first hear about the Wayback Machine? And he goes, Peabody and Sherman, which I thought was freaking hilarious. That actually got a pretty good laugh in court. She kept trying to catch up on things and as if it was like some aha, and it wasn't. Here's one that was also stupid. She was like, so when you were first a police officer on patrol in Salt Lake, you were in this area, and she called it something, and he said, that's not actually what we called any area. I was assigned to, I think he called it 235, and he said that was in the Avenues, which is a specific neighborhood, but Blair Street was not part of that beat. She actually identified completely the wrong neighborhood and the wrong number. He actually said, oh, the area you're talking about would be this number. She's like, but that's not the beat that you were familiar with or that you knew. Just because his first beat was not where this event happened does not mean he doesn't know that area. In fact, police officers eventually know their entire city very well. They get assigned to different areas. They'll often actually work in other cities. If other cities nearby need help, like I remember there was a few years ago, there was a potential active shooter. Turns out it wasn't, but there was the alarm went off about that high school in a city or one or two over from where I am, and several agencies from different cities went over to help. Cops know their entire city and neighboring cities. What are you talking about, lady? She's trying to say that Detective Coates was driving the train, as she put it, planting the idea of which house it was or whatever, which he was not. She remembered the tree. That was but the defense was like, there are lots of big trees in that area. Okay, but she recognized that one. And that showed a picture. It's a distinctive tree. It kind of has like these two very distinctive trunks. The fact that MB had said that maybe there was brick, the defense just kept harping on the fact that there wasn't brick. Now, there might have been brick inside the house for all we know. In the 70s, that was a big thing. I think this was an older house, so it might have had brick inside. But at the same time, if she saw brick on many houses in that area and she'd only been to his house a couple times, she wouldn't have known or remembered very much. The neighborhood I grew up in, a lot of it was built in the same time period, and a lot of the floor plans are similar. And so a lot of the exteriors are similar. So if she had something like that where several of the houses did have brick and then maybe a few did not, that would stick in her mind as well. It's a non-issue. Oh, well, she's changing her story. Detective Coates said no. She's clarifying and correcting her own record on her own accord. And then she's like, you gave her a lot of wiggle room in her answers, which pissed me off. You told her you believed her. You told her, you're not alone in this. I'm proud of you. He's like, yeah, I did. Police, they will build whatever relationship they need to get accurate information. And sometimes that could be interrogating. But in the case of a victim, it's relating and building trust. And he did believe her. That's why he's investigating. He spent a year and a half on this. What the heck? When it came to, let's see, I think it was MB's mother's interview. There's not a recording, just a report. Oh my goodness. Again, she's trying to make it sound like everything is nefarious. Trauma-informed victim interviews. How do you get certain responses or whatever? And if you're not going to lead the person, he goes, those are more like child forensic interviews that you're describing. And then the state rested on the end of day 2. I didn't expect that. So on day 3, the defense put on their defense on the first little part of the day. And alas, traffic and life kept me from, I missed getting in. I missed the defense's case, but it wasn't long. I can kind of guess what they did. So it probably wasn't much of anything. But I was there then for the closing arguments. One thing I appreciated in the jury instructions is it said that conduct, the definition of the word conduct is an action or an omission. Either one of those is considered conduct. In the prosecution's closing argument, it was Attorney Heiner doing it. Went back to that M&B never forgot, but he got to change his name, move on, and move away. He referred to her mother's testimony. This is when she said that MB shut down and that as a mother, she had never seen her daughter behave that way. That she tried to go into her bedroom and get more out of her, but at that point, it was kind of a little too late. The misunderstanding over what the dad may or may not have said or whatever, but this is what MB remembered. So again, I think he said both. He went over then the elements that they needed to prove. He said specifically all that they needed was the things that MB had said, because everything she said corroborated all the other evidence. She is clearly a truthful person. The details, the emotion, the context, common sense appeal, part of the jury instructions, all of that lines up with proof that what she is saying is real. Then you talk about KP's testimony, the other victim from Utah County. All of that lines up as well. What the burden of proof in Utah definition is that you're firmly convinced. And you could convict on her word alone for consistency. The fact that she reported this to her parents contemporaneously in 2008. She reported it to the police in 2022, testified in court, and her story has remained the same the entire time, with the only exception being that she clarified the date. The defense's closing arguments, it was the older and more seasoned of the two, brought up a thrift store story, but not a puzzle this time. It was the old mousetrap game, the board game, where you have all the little pieces that you put together and eventually you can catch the mouse. The prosecution on their rebuttal closing, I love that they brought that in and they said, we're not looking at a Rube Goldberg machine, which is, it was really complicated things where it's like, oh, the hammer comes and does this and this lever that bumps the ball. And eventually, by the very end, it's some very simple thing that gets done. We're looking at Occam's razor, essentially. This is actually quite simple. The defense's argument was, if you're missing any of these pieces, then the mousetrap won't work. And he's like, we don't need all of these very complicated things. Just look at the simple evidence. Any gaps in her memory are because what she's saying is true. She's not making crap up to fill in those blanks. Crap up was my word, not his. If she had been making up a story, she would have filled in the blanks. And he says, we do remember when we're pinned down. Basically what I just said, that if something is traumatic and deeply emotional, we will remember that. We won't remember the color of his jeans. Won't remember if there's brick necessarily, but we will remember being held down. And then he talked about other things, even his testimony or the things that he has said and done, because he didn't testify. But things that he has said and done, that alone would be enough to convict, because everything he has said and done is clearly a lie. Nothing he says can be corroborated. So he talks about some things that we know that just uphold her story, the Craigslist ad, the credit application, the civil suit. They had clearly been broken up by then. She had requested the docket, and Coates already knew about it. By the time she told him about it, he already knew about it because of his own investigation. The phone records, when she changed her number both times, all of that. Also, that MB's mother remembers it happening in December. Her dad thought it was in January. So the roommate Eric verified that Nicholas had worked at Chili's at some point. He bragged about being an academic, having gone to Harvard. He didn't actually go to Harvard. He took one extension course, and then he called himself a Harvard scholar from that point on. He played the Mormon card a lot. He loved his Apple stuff, loved the Apple company and products, and stole his roommate's iMac and iPhone. His roommate never liked him. Shocker. MB met him maybe once. As Eric said, it corroborates her testimony. Nicholas claimed that KP and Eric talked a lot. Eric said no, they didn't. KP said no, they didn't. So again, Nicholas is the one lying, and the other two are corroborating, and they don't even know each other. There was actually an objection from the defense during the prosecution's closing. That's very unusual. Some of the mom's concerns, apparently, when they were planning the early part of the wedding, Nicholas was going to insist that her family fly in his family from Rhode Island. The audacity. All the bricks conversation again, who really cares? Then he brought up this chart. It was like a graph. The similarities of all the different stories that we're hearing, and the more the similarities are alike, the higher the credibility. KP's testimony, it was so similar. They didn't know each other at all, but it shows his pattern of behavior, including they met online. In her case, it was MySpace, that he jacked up on her credit, was controlling her with money. It looked a little bit different, but a lot of the similar tactics that he was at the home in, and the timing of the event, that it was right after a breakup. and also that he was going to tell the police that she assaulted him. All lines up with what MB experienced. Also, that he blocked her from leaving the room. That was a common element, that he wouldn't let a woman leave. Happened to MB as well. He pushed her down and held her down, threatening to call 911, saying that she did it to him, as well as that he not using protection behavior after the fact. Where he continued to email KP just as he did with MB. With the KP, it was, I'll pay you back if you drop the R charges against me. And so he says, yeah, even his statements and his behaviors are enough to convict alone. But we have both, including his actions that he changed his name, he moved to the UK, pretended to not know how to pronounce Rossi, and all of that. The defense is closing and trying to poke holes in the timeline, which was just stupid, in my opinion. She claimed that MB's testimony was recently fabricated when she had all these documentations. Give me a break. And that there were two women's testimonies. That's not an accident. Yeah, that just shows he's guilty. Somehow she claimed that the MB said that it was in September that all this happened, but that she never clarified, and nothing was entered into evidence about that. So I'm not sure where that came from. She seemed to imply that MB was being flaky or lying to her family when she brought him home for Thanksgiving and called him just a friend. He always played the sad little puppy. And so I can see her saying, you know what? He has nowhere to go to for Thanksgiving. And her family going, okay, he can come. My family did that a lot when I was growing up. We often had some random person that we didn't really know over for Thanksgiving because they had nowhere else to go, and my parents would host them. So to say, hey, my friend has nowhere to go, can he come? Sure. And then maybe not wanting to admit to your family I'm dating them and it's kind of moving fast. I can see her not wanting to say that right away. Weirdly, the defense takes MB's word that the civil suit was after the breakup, when they attack everything else she said. Then they're trying to say that the eviction notice wasn't until December 29th, but yeah, this event she's claiming took place earlier in December. But I think he moved up to the Blair house. I don't know this. They didn't have a rental agreement that they found. I think he moved up there because he was unwelcome in the Orem house and wanted to get out, and he moved in with someone without signing anything until later. When the eviction notice was finally delivered, there was like $5,000 of unpaid rent. So I think he was trying to get away from the heat before the official eviction notice actually happened. Again, the defense harped on the fact that she actually emailed him and responded and talked to him on the phone a few times afterward. Why would you do that? Because you're scared that he's going to stalk you and hurt you again. Again, slowly stepping away and trying not to make him mad. Like, duh. There are so many moments where I'm like, you're a woman. Why are you making these arguments that are betraying your own gender? That really bugged me. I understand that she was doing her job. I do. But it really felt like she was betraying her entire gender. Women, we know we need to placate men to survive sometimes. That's what you do. You don't want to piss anyone off. Weirdly, the defense did not contradict the statements that Nicholas had gone into a rage at the car. Obviously, she was scared of him. He's been yelling and raging at her for over an hour, banging on her car. Of course she's scared. Of course she is by that point. And so she's like, oh, maybe what happened in his room was makeup. Yes, they weren't making up. She was terrified of this man. She was going to bring him home because she's a nicer person than he is, but she's scared. Why didn't you run him over? Maybe she's a nicer person than I am. I'm like, yeah, you think? Yeah, you think? Yeah, I think so. Oh, and this picture right here, this is from when he was still in Scotland and claiming that he had converted to Orthodox Judaism so that he could claim people were treating him poorly from anti-Semitism because he always has to be a victim. So the defense claimed that the prosecution narrative is that MB had no agency and she was forced into everything, into buying the rings and da. That's not what the prosecution's argument was at all. The prosecution was saying that he was manipulative and pressured her, not that he forced her. There's a pattern, guys. There's a pattern. Well, why would she lie? She goes, that's not an element of the R word. You posed a question and then you said something that's not an answer, good or bad. It's not even an answer. So, okay. To contradict the defense, we have no evidence that MB was ever a liar. Everything we hear is that she told the truth all the time. So suddenly she's lying and making up all this crap? No. Calling it makeup after he raged and banged on her car, pretended to call the police on her, saying that he's going to tell the police that she hurt him. Sure, she wanted to get back together. That makes lots of sense, especially when she never saw him again after that. Okay. The defense said, oh yeah, maybe MB is misremembering that she was a willful participant. If she's not outright lying, maybe she's just misremembering. You don't misremember something that is that traumatic. Again, I know she's doing her job, but the defense says calling her vulnerable after a TBI isn't right, and it contradicts her own testimony. No, it doesn't at all. She was vulnerable. Clearly, he's a horrible person and he took advantage of it. Yeah, you need to put it into context. Like, yeah, we are. He's an artist. That's the context. During the defense's closing, MB was completely hunched over, just blocking things out. Understandably, she had spent 2.5 days in the same room as this man, having to relive everything and testify to that. And her friend was kind of comforting her, bringing her back a little. The defense says that, oh, well, the prosecution cannot place him on Blair Street in December. Well, how did he get there? How did he move if he had no money? He got there because he had no money, he had left his other apartment, and he may have actually still had the money that she gave him, like $1,000 for rent, that maybe he didn't use it for rent. He was just slid in and manipulated himself into somebody else's house. And the defense literally said, you can't just make common sense inferences and hope they come out in your favor. Well, the jury instructions specifically said you can make common sense inferences. Literally, that's in the jury instructions. You can make common sense inferences. And if they come out in your favor, great. But yeah, you can make common sense inferences, woman. Oh, she was also very suspicious of the fact that Detective Coates didn't subpoena phone records himself to make sure that the phone records that she got were real. But everything that she got was consistent. But at the same time, she goes, well, why didn't he verify? I'm like, okay, technically that might have been their only good argument. He could have gotten the same documents himself to make sure they matched hers. But this is actually what it looked like in court. So just the nasal cannula of oxygen, which I don't think he needs. He spoke just a couple times, like, so are you planning on testifying? No, Your Honor. Very, very husky, but the fake accent is gone. The defense talked about how her mother took a month off of work. Oh, so MB was vulnerable then. Make up your mind. The kind of were implying that her mother is either making it up or doesn't actually love her daughter. Those are two pretty extreme things. Her mother and father didn't view this conversation as a fight. It was about the rings and not about this other thing that had happened. That's perception. That's what they remembered. And she says, all about the timeline. How about it's all about all the other evidence? And she communicated with him later. Oh, gasp. Everything she's trying to make sound like it's like this big wah-ha. It's like, to me, it's like not. She actually says after it happened, she got up, she said goodbye, and she leaves. Who does that? Like, well, what else was she supposed to do? Give him a kiss? It would have been makeup S. There would have been more to her goodbye. She just got out of there quickly. Give me a break. Lies next to firmly. Okay. And at one point, she actually even said, was trying to define reasonable doubt. And she's like, so are you 100% okay? There's not supposed to be a percentage. Never mind. That's a bad slip up. In the closing prosecution, the rebuttal closing statement, that was Simmons who got up. He addressed how, yeah, the argument in the car, it was just one sided. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't really a fight because she was just being yelled at. Often we surprise ourselves with our own reactions. We can't judge her for how she responded. And she used her agency. She did. She wasn't forced into these things. She used her agency to break up with him. She's not a jerk, so she didn't run him over. Women tried to placate, they tried to stay safe. And she had no idea how long he had been emailing her. She would delete them, have them go to a different folder. He circles back to the whole mousetrap thing. Again, we're not trying to catch a mouse the most complicated way. This is not that. He goes back to the bridge concept, getting to reasonable doubt that the other prosecutor had brought up. We have overbuilt this bridge. We have so many columns supporting it that this is way more than is needed to go beyond a reasonable doubt. And he kind of hinted back to the defense's opening statement with their whole thrift store puzzle. He said, this is not a complex puzzle. It's a puzzle that maybe has 4 pieces. And he lists them out. Was this reckless? Was it SA? Was there consent? And I forget what the last one was. Basically, the biggest important puzzle pieces are not that the house was on Blair Street, that it was Gateway Mall, how long the drive was, that the layout wasn't like a typical apartment. Those things they bolster her point, but those aren't the biggest pieces of the puzzle. Also, that she left the house after dark. It was December. She didn't scope out all the houses and all the details of every house around her. She hurried to her car. She just ran out and drove home. And then he says, so the defense says that we can't put him on Blair Street. MB put him on Blair Street. She does. She does in December. Okay, so someone's lying. You guys, as the jury, have to decide who is lying. Clearly, Nicholas Rossi lied about everything, and has told the truth about so many things we can prove are true. That's when juror number three, the Mr. Goatee Man, started to look more interested. At that point, I was like, okay, maybe he can be convinced. Maybe he can see he's recognizing that someone telling the truth consistently is a pattern that we can trust. That the rebuttal closing might have been what he needed to be convinced. Jurors 9 and 10 were announced to be the alternates and they were excused. Those two were both white men. One was 50-ish, one was like 60 or 70, in my opinion. Turns out that one of the older 70-year-old-ish, I'm guessing, man, who was the one who wore a shirt and tie, he became the foreperson. They deliberated for like 8 hours, almost exactly. It ended up being closer to 8.5 to 9 by the time, how long we ended up waiting, and then to actually hear it. It was intense. I didn't think it would take that long. It was a 2.5 day trial. It was a lot. We were long days. We were waiting, getting worried it would be a hung jury, would end up going maybe to the next day. But at a long last, we were brought into the courtroom, got to watch the verdict. One of the deputies was like, no facial expressions. And I was like, I was ready to go, no outbursts, but like I can't control my face necessarily. So we were all like, when it was announced guilty. It was a very intense emotional moment. And it didn't happen to me, but it was in that room after hearing everything that I'd heard and seeing MB and her strength. I teared up. I shed some tears, and I was shaking. And one of the Utah County prosecutor was there the whole time, and they'll be working on the case in September. Afterwards, he was like shaking too, and he goes, "I feel like I've had a stroke or something." It was intense. Nicholas Rossi was. They said it was going to be held on a no bail hold until he is then sentenced on October 20th. It was an intense week, and I'm really glad that I went. I got to meet some fascinating people and learn a lot. I will be attending as much of the Utah County trial as I can. Unfortunately, I am going to miss some of it. Apparently, it will be almost a 2-week trial counting jury selection, but it begins as I'm heading down to Arizona to teach at a conference. So I am going to have to miss part of it, alas, but I'll be there for the end of it. The bummer, I'm going to probably miss KP's testimony, but there we are. If you've been around this long, appreciate it. Give us a like and a subscribe if you're new, and all of that good stuff. Let me know what you think of this story in the comments. Drop some chocolate emojis or your comfort food of choice, because all of those things go a long way toward helping the channel. It's late. I need to go to bed. I might grab myself, I don't know, a spoonful of Nutella before I crash.